Hello again, I am Blunty, and this is the Parrot Rolling Spider Mini Drone. Now, there's no shortage of these palm-sized micro quadcopters around these days, and the Rolling Spider looks very much like any one of them, but this unassuming little bugger is by far the most sophisticated one out there. By a long march. It's unique in a few ways actually, the most obvious being that it doesn't come with any kind of traditional remote control. Instead, it uses low-energy Bluetooth connection to receive commands from Parrot's smartphone apps on iOS and Android. This allows it some very nifty tricks, impossible or just quite awkward in traditional controller systems, including several different choices of control method. My preference is the one that emulates a traditional Mode 2 twin-stick system, familiar to those people who already have some experience with remote-controlled flyers. But you can also have it obey your commands via your phone's motion sensor, which is surprisingly intuitive and quick to learn. You can also set custom acceleration, turning and climbing rates, and give it an artificial ceiling so it won't fly any higher than you tell it to. In the joypad control mode that I prefer, you also get another advantage. You can actually use your phone's camera to record your flight at the same time as you're controlling the flight. There is only one odd limitation in doing this though. There's no sound recorded on the video file. The final benefit of an app-based control method is the ability to quickly and easily update the firmware, something Parrot have actually been quite proactive on. There have been 2 firmware updates in just the few weeks I've been testing this unit. I mentioned in the opening that this drone was unusually sophisticated for its size. Well, aside from the clever phone app interface, on board is a pressure sensor for measuring its own altitude above 3 meters, and if it's below 3 meters, it uses an ultrasonic sensor to even more accurately sense its distance from the ground. These work in concert with the 3-axis gyroscope and 3-axis accelerometer, standard sensors that many multi-rotor drones normally have, which means it's very, very good at hovering all on its own. No need to ride the throttle like almost every other drone of this size. And to help it monitor its own speed and compensate for drift, there's even a downwards facing camera, which compares its view of the ground 60 times a second to work out which way it's moving and how fast. Now, the odd choice of name, Rolling Spider, comes from these big snap-on wheels which serve as protection for the spinning props, saving both themselves and your furniture from impact damage when you're flying indoors. But they also facilitate being able to roll up walls and across ceilings, and there's even a mode where you can simply use it to drive across the ground as some kind of awkward but amusing remote-controlled car. But quite frankly, I live in a very small and currently especially cluttered apartment, so I took the furniture-saving wheels off and headed outside, where I suspect many parents may prefer their kids to take this thing anyway. Outdoors, with more room to zoom, it feels much more at home. The nature of the Bluetooth control method using a phone does mean it's not the most twitch-responsive drone you'll find. In fact, sometimes I'd verge on calling it sluggish, especially at the edge of its range, which will vary a little depending on your phone, of course, but around about 20 meters or so is a safe distance to bet on. And should you exceed that range, it'll just obediently hover in place, waiting for you to wander close enough to reconnect. Now, aside from occasional sluggishness to respond to a command and the relatively small range, the Rolling Spider can actually be a rather nippy and acrobatic beastie. When you max out its inclination angle, that is, how far it'll tilt itself forward to gain speed, it can pick up a fair clip, and it'll happily climb straight up to 10 meters in just a couple of seconds. This is the max altitude the app will allow you to set, which is good. It keeps it in range vertically even when it's a bit away from you horizontally. And that downwards facing camera can also be put to use for simple snapshots, although it is a component chosen for its motion detection purposes, not photography, so don't expect amazing drone selfies, but still, it is pretty fun. Much like many other mini drones, the Rolling Spider 2 has a one-touch stunt button. On the app you can set it for flips, back flips, or rolling flips to either side. Just double tap the screen and it'll flip out for you. There's even a button to press, meaning you can throw it utterly carelessly or even merely drop it, and it will immediately start its engines, right itself, and sit in a nice stable level hover. There's even a button for takeoff and landing, so you can just tap that and not even have to worry about it. It just does it automatically for you. That unusually sophisticated array of sensors on this little beastie means you get an incredibly stable and uncommonly well-behaved flight. This is, without a doubt, the easiest, most stable drone I've flown yet. However, it's still quite possible to completely arse things up. The good news there, though, is this thing is also unusually tough. It weighs barely 65 grams with the battery on board, but I've binned it many times, sometimes by accident, sometimes deliberately just to see if it'd live. I've gone into grass, asphalt, concrete, trees, my TV, my big fat face on one occasion, which stung. Half the time, prop or two might pop off. They're easily remounted. And the worst I've ever come my way with was a bent prop when I slammed it straight into the ground face first. And even that wasn't a showstopper. I just bent the prop back into place and took off again immediately for yet another stable, well-behaved flight. No damage done. So, top marks for toughness, top marks for beginner friendliness, top marks for cleverness, and most important of all, it really is quite fun just to zoom about with a little thing. Now, things I don't love about it. Well, I'm still very much a beginner when it comes to flying multi-rotor craft, but the iPhone interface just doesn't have that wonderfully physical, tactile feel that proper control sticks give you, so piloting can feel a bit dulled somehow. But for those new to flying toys, it is a godsend. The learning curve is vastly smaller, and it does have that traditional joypad emulation mode, so you can start teaching yourself how to fly using standard controls with this guy. A few times in my weeks with it, the app has refused to properly reconnect, usually after a battery change. This is very frustrating, but I did eventually discover a simple reboot of the phone itself fixed the issue immediately. I don't know for sure if it's an issue with the drone, or the app, or in how my iPhone handles unexpected disconnects of Bluetooth devices. It's not a deal breaker, but it is something to be aware of if you run into it. Battery life, well, it's a bit on the short side if I'm honest with you guys, even for these mini drones, which usually have fairly short battery lives just by nature of having to carry a very small battery. With the Rolling Spider, you get about 7 or 8 minutes worth of flight time from a charge of the 550 mAh lithium polymer batteries that take about 90 minutes over USB to recharge. So, it appears that very clever sensor array does come at a price of flight time, because less sophisticated drones of similar size will often get closer to 11 minutes of flight time from smaller capacity batteries even. So, I'd certainly recommend the purchase of a spare battery or two to avoid that frustration. Luckily, they're not too expensive. They're about 20 quid each on Amazon. And on price, in Aussie currency units, the Rolling Spider asks for just under 140 Aussie dollars, which, considering the sophistication here, seems pretty decent. For comparison's sake, similar-sized toy-grade quadcopters can range from around about $40 all the way up to about 170 odd. So 140 quid for a drone this clever feels like a fair price to me. I've seen in some of the early reviews of this product just after it launched a fistful of issues people commonly complaining of. I'm happy to report, however, that I hit none of them. So it seems Parrot's very active and ongoing development of firmware updates is working really nicely to iron out those little bugs and tweaks and stuff. All in all, a very, very fun toy, very clever, very well behaved, and very beginner friendly. And that is a very lot of veries. It is a bit dumbed down as far as what the flight and control experience of more traditional RC drones feels like. A kind person would call it user-friendly. The more snobby drone pilot types might call it a dummy mode drone and whine about the lack of skill it takes or encourages from its pilots. But whether or not its semi-autopilot cleverness is an annoyance or a thing of brilliance and joy really does depend on you. On its own merits, it is a really well-developed bit of technological plaything, and I dig that. I'm simply impressed with how clever it is. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.